This video today is brought to you by Rebel Massage Bodywork Products, because why wouldn't I sponsor my own video? There may already be a lot of videos out there on how to work on the feet, and some of them might even be my own. I might have even put one out really recently. And there is a lot that we can do on the foot, but I also have a lot to say. I want to start by saying that these images were taken at a workshop that I spoke at recently, so I don't have a video for these paintings very specifically, but doesn't mean I won't do one soon. I did use them though to demonstrate the power of fascia in the lower leg and foot, and that is what I want to talk about today. So here on the left leg, you can see the deeper, more intrinsic muscles, and then on the right leg, you see the more superficial muscles. But what I want to point out is this kind of clear but kind of pasty, goopy line that is representing the deep fascia that separates those two muscle compartments. And so with all of the fascia surrounding these deeper muscles coming down into the ankle and creating support around the tendons that attach into the bottom of the foot, and in the more superficial compartment, this fascia wrapping around and helping to form the Achilles tendon that anchors into the heel, all of this combined with the fact that fascia will reinforce itself every time it is used and abused, it is no wonder that the lower leg, ankle, and foot gets bound, tight, restricted, limited, and is host to a lot of dysfunction. So what do we do with all of that information? That is such a good question. A lot of bodywork involves lengthening tissues and opening things up. And that's a good thing and can be really effective, but today I'm going to switch things around. As you've probably already noticed, I've got my right hand on my client's foot and I'm moving it around passively as I do the work with my left hand. But my left hand is not sliding up towards her knee, it's sliding down towards her ankle. I like to think about it like this. Instead of telling my clients' tissues that whatever they've been doing is wrong and trying to correct them and push them in a different direction, triggering a whole downward spiral of shame, I want to instead guide them towards a direction that feels productive and encouraging. So I've worked with her foot passively, and now I'm pulling her into the process and getting her to dorsiflex her ankle so that when she pulls her toes up towards her knee, I'm continuing to slide down towards the heel, guiding all of that fascia and connective tissue to ease into the movement that it's supposed to do. And as a side note, you can continue to do this work passively with your client if that's what feels like is appropriate, or you can actively engage your client like I did. Or, working passively or actively, you can stay superficial, just underneath the surface of the skin, or you can sink a little bit deeper and get into that fascia that divides the different compartments of muscles that you're focused on. The possibilities are endless. Whatever you choose to do, keep this in mind. The connective tissue and fascia that wraps around the different compartments of muscles in the lower leg eventually come down and feed into the Achilles tendon, which feeds into the calcaneus, which extends then into the plantar fascia, out to the ball of the foot, and eventually into the toes. The juncture at the heel tends to take a lot of abuse. And like I said before, when fascia gets overused and abused, it binds up and wants to protect an area. Feeding all of this fascial fabric into the heel is going to soften the cumulative blow that this poor bone has felt. So clearly when the abuse goes on for too long, all sorts of dysfunctions show up, like plantar fasciitis or an Achilles tendon strain or tarsal tunnel syndrome. And I'm not really focused on any one of these specifically, because if we don't start to pay attention to the fascia and connective tissue that helps to support a joint, that support can quickly switch to a more stifling grip. So take your time here and squish things up around the heel. So that way, when you get into the plantar fascia, you don't feel like you're punching a brick wall. Now that I'm down into the foot, all I'm really doing is sinking into the thick of it. But like some kind of fancy magician, you might be focused on what my right thumb is doing, but what I want you to look at is my left hand. Every time I sink into the tissues at the bottom of the foot, I'm using my left hand to encourage the heel to move fluidly and become reacquainted with a healthy, pain-free motion. This doesn't just mean dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, and subtlety is your best friend. After making a little or a lot of nice here, pull tapotement back out of your bag. It might have been a while since you've used it, but it is one of my favorite techniques for the foot. Why? Because that vibration can go all the way up through the foot and the ankle, up into the legs, through the hips, up the spine, and all the way up, dare I say it, into the sole. Okay, so I've lifted my client's leg up off the table and I may be working up towards the ceiling, but I'm still working down towards the heel. Basically, I'm doing a lot of the same work. I'm encouraging the fascia that surrounds the lower leg to move towards the Achilles tendon and the heel and softening that fabric into the foot. The difference here is a difference in perspective from the client. Because the knee is bent, I can move the lower leg a little bit more as opposed to just the ankle, which is going to affect the more superficial compartment because that's where the gastrocs live, and the gastrocs are the ones that cross over the knee. But really, the client just feels this all differently, and that can set a whole different tone. Your ability to shake the foot and ankle here, shake it a little bit like a Polaroid picture, is also just going to rattle everything loose. It is, after all, really hard to keep your grip on something that is shaking like crazy. I've returned to twisting things up or down, depending on how you're looking at it, and into the Achilles tendon. And I've added little mini pin and stretches here because, like I said before, it is an effective technique, but I want to get back to catering to the heel. From this position, encouraging all of that gripped tissue onto the calcaneus down towards the foot can feel really different to a client. And maybe it's because as you're pushing down, you're really pushing up, and typically down to them is also associated with gravity, which is now flipped upside down, so everything feels different. And I don't know that there needs to be a scientific explanation as to why. All I know is that this can be really effective. Pulling out my magician's cape, again, I'm sinking down into the plantar fascia. And although I'm pulling the foot into dorsiflexion, which does open up the tissues from the heel, the sleight of hand here is coming from the thumbs, which you can't see. But what I'm doing at the top of the foot is encouraging the toes to stay either neutral or flexed a little bit towards the bottom of the foot. This keeps me focused on mushing things together as opposed to pulling everything apart. Now that I've crowded all of this fabric together, I did spend a little time moving around the metatarsals, and now I'm actually going to stretch things out. It's a little bit like collecting all the facts before you make any conclusions. If you assume anything before you know anything, it often leads you astray. Also, I really like this technique as a variation of making nice. Steamrolling a forearm down or up the calf just kind of pulls everything together. And now for some bonus foot material. And by material, I mean techniques, not fabric. I am going to stay focused, though, on the idea that crowding all of this fabric is going to benefit the plantar fascia and any pain associated with that. The work I've done up to this point has pushed everything towards the heel, and now I'm continuing to guide that fascia toward the ball of the foot and help ease the pull when all of that tension grips down in this area. Using one thumb to support the other because you can't help a foot if you can't help yourself, I'm just sliding down away from the heel and into the ball of the foot, and then as I do that, I'm going to focus my intention into a little bit of friction. There is a lot of controversy over whether or not the work we do can actually shift the way that fascia sits in the body. But there's not a lot of controversy over the fact that warmth can help to melt things that are isolated and stuck. Using my own collection of knuckles or whatever tools you have on hand, spend some time being thorough on every aspect of the heel and focus in on the idea that the connective tissue and the fascia doesn't just end with the Achilles tendon and go into the plantar fascia. It surrounds the calcaneus and all of its adjacent parts, and the more detail you use, the more effective your work will be. Moving away from the heel, it is time to squish the ball of the foot. The heel may carry all the weight, but the ball of the foot is no stranger to abuse. With the knowledge that the combination of fascia and epithelial tissue is particularly thick in this area, I'm crowding all of this tissue together and pulling it away from its underlying structures. Side note, this tends to be a fan favorite for anybody who favors fashion over function and owns a lot of high heels. And so, similar to how I focused all of that attention towards the heel and then stretched things out, allowing for some more range of motion, I'm doing the same thing here at the ball of the foot and the toes. I've guided the tissues towards where I want them to go, and now I want to give the toes a little experience with their newfound freedom. I think a lot of massage therapists get really bored with their routine and do the same thing over and over again from client to client, and that can trigger a really short career. My advice to you: stand up if you're sitting down. Change the direction that you're working on the tissues. Change the position of your client. Use as much detail in your work as possible. A lot of people think of their toes and the parts of their foot as one big unit, but if you spend some time on each toe and within and around all the moving parts of the foot and the ankle and the lower leg, your client will have an extra skip in their step as they leave your office, and you will feel reinvigorated.